In the middle of the morning rush hour, hundreds of people witnessed something no one could believe was real. A father in Australia is now facing murder charges after police say he dropped his 4-year-old daughter from a highway bridge. A very high bridge.
Hello, I've just witnessed a man throw a child over the Westgate Bridge.
Thrown a child, did you say?
Yes, blonde hair, in a ponytail.
How could a man throw his own daughter from a height of 190 feet to her death? Arthur Freeman was born in 1972 and grew up in Australia. By the late 1990s, he and Peter Barnes moved to North Richmond, Melbourne, Australia. Their relationship progressed quickly, leading to marriage on December 31st, 1999. And just a few weeks later, they left Australia for London, where Arthur secured a well-paying job, opening what seemed to be a nearly perfect chapter in their family life. In the years that followed, they had 3 children together, including a young girl, Darcey Freeman, born on February 11, 2004, along with 2 brothers whose identities have been kept private. To the family, Darcy was a vibrant and energetic child, strong-willed yet deeply affectionate, especially close to her siblings. She loved outdoor activities, from Auskick and tennis to spending hours jumping on the trampoline in their backyard, as if her world revolved around simple joy and the safety of her family. But behind that seemingly peaceful picture, cracks had already begun to form. After their 3rd child was born, the family returned to Australia, and it was here that things slowly began to change. Arthur struggled to find suitable employment, and financial and psychological pressures started to weigh heavily on him, bringing with them increasingly unstable shifts in his mood and behavior. The marriage between Arthur and Peta grew tense, with underlying conflicts gradually escalating. By 2007, police had already been called to intervene in a domestic dispute. Although the specific details were not made public, it was clear that things had spiraled beyond control. Around the same time, Peta began expressing serious concerns to general practitioners about the safety of their children, a sign that she sensed something was wrong, even if no one could yet imagine the tragedy that was quietly taking shape. In the end, the marriage came to an end in early 2007 and was officially finalized with a divorce in June 2008. Initially, after the divorce, Arthur and Peta agreed to share custody of the children on a rotating 3-day schedule, an arrangement that, so at least on paper, appeared stable, but that fragile balance quickly began to crack. After the divorce was officially finalized in June 2008, Arthur announced his intention to return to the United Kingdom to address residency matters, a decision that immediately raised concerns for Peta. She moved quickly to seek adjustments to the custody arrangement through the legal system, a step that was not only protective, but also a clear signal that she no longer felt safe. Arthur returned to Australia in December 2008 and began seeking legal support, preparing for an upcoming court hearing. The hearing was scheduled for January 27th and 28th, 2009, at the Federal Magistrates Court. But before that, the entire family was required to undergo a psychological evaluation, a process meant to determine what was truly in the best interests of the children. When Arthur attended the assessment on December 12, 2008, signs of instability began to surface. He arrived late, repeatedly interrupted others, and displayed a style of communication that created tension in the room, even negatively affecting his own children. The psychologist ultimately concluded that the children should live with their mother and only spend time with their father on alternating weekends. Then, on January 28, 2009, The court's decision was officially handed down. Peter Barnes was granted additional custody time, meaning Arthur lost a significant part of his role as a father in their daily lives. After leaving the courtroom, Arthur took the children back to his parents' holiday home. There, he poured out his emotions to his parents, Norma and Peter, not with calm, but with a sense of pressure and a loss of control. Arthur told his father that he felt forced to prove he was worthy of being a father, that the entire psychological evaluation process had worked against him, as if everything had already been predetermined. In Arthur's mind, staying silent, being patient, or following the process had brought him nothing, and the final outcome, as he saw it, was that he had lost everything. Arthur's father would later recall that his son seemed consumed by the need to constantly defend his role as a father under relentless legal pressure, as if each decision from the court was not only taking away time with his children, but also gradually eroding his very sense of identity. Late that night, Arthur received a call from his ex-wife, Peter Barnes. She simply wanted to hear her children's voices before the new day began. And Arthur replied that the next morning, on the way to take Darcy to school, he would let the children call her back. At around 5:15 a.m. on January 29, 2009, Arthur drove a white Toyota Land Cruiser away from his parents' home in Aries Inlet, with all three children in the car, beginning the journey toward Hawthorne, Melbourne. Before leaving, Arthur's father had asked if he should come along, a vague sense of unease creeping in as he realized his son had not yet stabilized after what had just happened in court. But Arthur refused, and the car pulled away. In the back seat, the three children sat together, completely unaware of where this journey would lead. It was Darcy's first day back at St. Joseph's Catholic Primary School, a day that should have been filled with the excitement of a 4-year-old. Peter stood waiting at the school gate, holding her daughter's uniform, believing that in just a few minutes she would see Darcy step out of the familiar car. Meanwhile, throughout the nearly 90-minute drive, Arthur made a series of phone calls, speaking with his sister about ordinary things: lunch, getting to school, the worry of being late. He then called a friend in England, Elizabeth Lamb, and during that conversation, Arthur revealed his fear of losing his children, his sense of helplessness, and the anger building inside him. He spoke about the many angry men in the court system, men who felt pushed aside in their role as fathers. Arthur said he would continue fighting to regain custody. But then, the call ended abruptly when the phone on the other end went dead. At 8:54 a.m., Peter Barnes made a call, her voice rising with chinta as she realized Darcy had not arrived at school on time. Meanwhile, the car was moving closer to the West Gate Bridge, and in that very moment, Arthur made the decision that would determine everything. On the phone, he said a sentence that would send a chill down anyone's spine. "Say goodbye to your children." Then he hung up, no further words. The car continued forward, climbing onto the West Gate Bridge amid the heavy flow of morning rush hour traffic. Arthur pulled into the emergency lane, turned on the hazard lights in what appeared to be a deliberate, almost disturbingly calm action. He stepped out of the car, took Darcy Freeman out, carried her to the railing, and threw her from a height of approximately 190 feet straight down into the water below. Everything happened in just a few seconds, yet it burned itself into the minds of those who witnessed it. A passing truck captured the moment the vehicle stopped with its hazard lights flashing, a small detail that later became crucial evidence showing this was not a spontaneous act. Around them, morning commuters stood frozen in shock, many immediately calling the police, their voices trembling, unable to comprehend what they had just seen. An image no one ever expects to encounter in their lifetime.
I Hello, I've just witnessed a man throw a child over the Westgate Bridge.
Thrown a child, did you say?
Yes. Blonde hair, in a ponytail.
Then Arthur returned to the car with chilling composure, fastened his seatbelt as if he had just completed something ordinary, as if nothing had happened, and continued driving. In the back seat, his two sons fell into a state of panic, unable to comprehend what had just taken place. As the car left the Westgate Bridge, the older boy repeatedly begged his father to turn back and saying that Darcy could not swim. For a brief moment, Arthur slowed down, as if considering it. But then the car kept moving, leaving Darcy behind, while Arthur had no idea that she was still alive, struggling in the cold water, fighting for every second of survival. On the other side, emergency dispatchers receiving calls from witnesses could hardly believe what they were hearing. Many hoped it was just a misunderstanding, that perhaps someone had thrown a doll off the bridge. But when authorities arrived at the scene, the brutal truth was quickly confirmed. The water police were the first to reach Darcy, pulling her from the water after about 15 minutes, a span of time that seemed impossible to survive. What stunned everyone was that Darcy was still showing signs of life. Immediately, paramedics rushed in and worked tirelessly, was trying to preserve that fragile life for nearly an hour right there at the scene. Instead of continuing the journey to school as planned, Arthur drove straight to the federal magistrate's court, as if the destination of that morning had never been the school at all. At around 10:30 a.m., just over an hour after what had happened on the Westgate Bridge, Arthur pulled up outside the courthouse, stepped out, and led his two sons inside. He did not flee. He did not hide. When police traced the information and arrived, Sergeant Sean Hill was the one who approached Arthur directly. When asked what had happened, Arthur did not explain, did not justify himself. He simply said one sentence: "Take my children away." A short statement, as if in that very moment, Arthur had separated himself from the role of being a father. The two boys were quickly taken away by psychological support staff, while Arthur was handed over to investigators. At that point, he began to show signs of collapse, trembling, crying, almost unresponsive. A forensic medical examiner later confirmed that Arthur was not in a condition to be interviewed immediately, and police swiftly placed Arthur under arrest. While Arthur was being held in custody, Darcy was airlifted by helicopter to the Royal Children's Hospital, Melbourne, in extremely critical condition. Her body had suffered severe trauma from the fall, multiple injuries across her body with significant internal damage. Doctors immediately placed her in intensive care, using life support machines to keep her alive, but her condition was beyond recovery. Meanwhile, Peeta Barnes was still standing at the school gate, while believing her daughter was simply running late. When she received the call, she knew instantly that something was terribly wrong. Peeta rushed to the hospital, and there she was forced to face a reality no mother could ever prepare for. Darcy could not be saved. The medical equipment was only keeping her body functioning. There was no miracle. In the end, Peeta had to make the decision to allow doctors to turn off the life support. And at 1:35 p.m., Darcy was pronounced dead. A 4-year-old child, gone just hours after leaving home for school. After Darcy Freeman passed away on the afternoon of January 29, 2009, just 1 week later, on February 6th, her funeral was held at the chapel of St. Kevin's College. Around 500 people attended, not only family and friends, but also the emergency responders who had been there that day, as many of whom still could not forget what they had witnessed. A heavy silence filled the space. No one spoke much, because there were no words strong enough to express the loss of a 4-year-old child. During the service, Peeta Barnes stood before everyone and spoke for her daughter. She called Darcy a little angel, a girl who loved wearing pink dresses, loved to dance, and loved the simple things every child deserves. Around the chapel, flowers and teddy bears were placed everywhere, as if people were trying to hold on to the image of Darcy, not in her final moments, but in the happiest memories of her life. After the service, Darcy's small white casket was carried out to the sound of church bells, a moment that many could not witness without breaking down. Her body was later cremated according to the family's wishes. Her ashes were taken to Pinaroo Valley Memorial Park, where a memorial bench was placed near Sir Thomas Maher Lake, a quiet place where those left behind could come, sit, and remember a child who was gone far too soon. The case quickly spread across Australia, not only because of its brutality, but because of how it happened. During the morning rush hour, right on the West Gate Bridge, in front of dozens, even hundreds of people, Arthur carried out the act in broad daylight, in front of strangers, and more horrifying than anything else, in front of his own 2 sons, children who sat in the car and witnessed the entire Ghutna unfold. What the public could not accept was not just what had happened, but the question behind it. How could a father do something like that to his own child? What was going through Arthur's mind that morning? Psychologists began to step in, attempting to analyze every action, every word, every warning sign that had come before. Was this a man who had completely lost control? Or was it a calculated act, driven by anger, pain, and a need for revenge? Two years after the tragedy, Arthur Freeman was brought to trial and maintained his plea of not guilty. When he appeared in court, he no longer resembled an ordinary man. His appearance was disheveled, his hair unkempt, his eyes vacant, sitting motionless as every detail of his actions was laid out before the jury. Prosecutor Gavin Silbert described Arthur with a phrase that left the courtroom in silence: a mad monk. The defense attempted to build a different narrative, arguing that Arthur had fallen into a state of psychological collapse that morning, that his actions did not come from clear awareness, but were the result of a severe mental breakdown. They claimed Arthur carried out the act without full understanding of what he was doing. Throughout the trial, the focus revolved around a single question: did Arthur truly have control over his actions? Arthur's father, Peter Freeman, was called to testify and recounted that morning when he realized something was wrong with his son. He said, "I asked him if he wanted me to come along in the car, and he said no." But the prosecution firmly rejected this argument. They presented a different picture, an intentional act, driven by anger and a desire to inflict deep emotional pain on Peter Barnes after a prolonged custody battle. 6 psychological experts were brought in to evaluate the case, and 5 of them reached the same conclusion. Arthur was fully aware of his actions at the time. He knew exactly what would happen, and he did it anyway. Psychiatrist Yvonne Skinner, who had worked on dozens of similar cases, stated clearly before the court that this was not an unconscious act, but one that was deliberate, chosen, and purposeful. The prosecution did not just reject the argument of loss of awareness. They posed a direct question that no one in the courtroom could avoid. If Arthur was not in control of his actions at that moment, then why were everything he did before and after so precise, structured, and rational? Arthur deliberately pulled the car into the emergency lane on the West Gate Bridge and turned on the hazard lights, a clearly safety-oriented action. He then continued driving to the federal magistrate's court, reversed, and parked properly, each step calculated, conscious, and fully controlled. This was not the behavior of someone who had lost awareness. And forensic psychiatrist Douglas Bell delivered pivotal testimony before the court. All observations from witnesses regarding his behavior on the morning Darcy died indicate that he understood the nature of his actions. He emphasized that a person in a state of impaired awareness would not be capable of carrying out such a complex sequence of actions. Then he reconstructed each step, not as a theory, but as a clearly goal-directed sequence. Mr. Freeman parked in the far left emergency lane, activated the hazard lights, opened the car door, reached inside and pulled Darcy from her seat. He carried her to the bridge, lifted her over the railing, and threw her. He then returned to the car, started it, and drove back into traffic. This is a complex sequence of goal-directed behaviors, inconsistent with the state of mind where actions are not conscious or voluntary. At that point, the prosecution's argument became unmistakably clear. This was not a moment of lost control, but a sequence of actions that were deliberate, chosen, and intentional. The jury was also presented with recordings of the phone calls Arthur made that morning, and those calls painted a remarkably clear picture of his state of mind before the act took place. He first called his sister, speaking about ordinary things, school lunch, the possibility of being late, without mentioning anything unusual. Then he called a friend in England, Elizabeth Lamb, and in that conversation, his anger began to surface. Arthur complained about the court system, about how fathers like him were not supported, and referred to angry women as a way of placing blame on his circumstances. Elizabeth later testified that Arthur sounded sad and frustrated, but there was nothing to suggest he had lost control or was unaware of his actions. The final call was to Peter Barnes, and this time everything was different. In her testimony before the court, Peter recalled, "I became extremely distressed. I don't remember how many times I called him. In one of those calls, he answered and said, 'Who is this?' I said, 'It's me.' Then he said, 'You're never going to see them again,' and hung up. Just minutes later, reports began to emerge. A child had been thrown from the West Gate Bridge. And then came the moment that left the entire courtroom unable to remain composed. The account of the young boy who had been in the car that day. And he described what happened not with analysis, but through the fragmented memory of a traumatized child. Dad got out with Darcy, and then he threw her off the bridge. I didn't hear her scream when I didn't hear anything. Didn't hear anything at all. He then recalled begging his father to turn back. I said, go back and get her. Darcy can't swim. But he just kept driving. There was no response, no turning back, only silence, and a decision that was never undone. After 19 days of intense trial, every argument, every piece of evidence, every testimony ultimately came down to a single question. Did Arthur Freeman have full awareness of his actions, or was it the result of a loss of psychological control? The jury withdrew to deliberate. No cameras, no arguments, only silence, and the weight of a decision that could never be undone. After 5 days of deliberation, they returned to the courtroom, and the verdict was delivered. Guilty. Not an accident, not a loss of control, but a conscious act. Immediately afterward, Peter Barnes stood before the court and delivered her victim impact statement, not as a witness, but as a mother who had lost her child, and who must live the rest of her life with the memory of that day.
Where to start is a challenge, as this statement brings to the surface all of the raw emotions I live with daily. The saying, "time heals all wounds," is not true for myself, and I don't ever expect it to be. Not a day goes by where I do not constantly think of Darcy, where I don't miss her and wish with all my heart that she was with me. No one can erase the thoughts and associated feelings I have of sitting in the hospital and having to tell the hospital staff that they were allowed to turn the life support machine off, of holding Darcy in my arms as she passed away and knowing that this decision would take her from me again and knowing that there was no other option available to me.
On April 11th, 2011, the sentencing of Arthur Freeman officially took place, a moment followed not only by the victim's family, but by the entire Australian community. 2 radio stations chose to broadcast the audio of the sentencing live, allowing the public to witness the conclusion of a case that had haunted so many for more than 2 years. Standing before the court, Justice Paul Coghlan did not avoid the nature of the crime, but he described Arthur's actions as a fundamental breach of trust.
What Darcy's last thoughts might have been does not bear thinking about, and her death must have been a painful and protracted one. The killing was in the presence of your son Benjamin, who was then 6, and your son Jack, who was 2. The community hopes Jack will be too young to remember.
Justice Paul Coghlan went on to make the motive behind the act unmistakably clear, without hesitation, without evasion. Arthur had used his own daughter as a tool to inflict the deepest possible pain on his ex-wife, and he had deliberately chosen a public location where the impact would spread widely and cause maximum shock. He emphasized that throughout the trial, Arthur had shown no signs of remorse. The judge also stated plainly that Arthur's prospects for rehabilitation were extremely low. However, when delivering the final decision, he said, "I understand that many will say your crime is so grave in so many respects that I should not fix a non-parole period, that you deserve to be imprisoned for life. I recognize the force of that argument. Yet the sentencing process is not that simple.
Whatever happens, you will spend what may be regarded by many as the best years of your life in prison. I have come to the conclusion that it is appropriate to fix a non-parole period. I do not regard you as being beyond redemption. You are only 37 years of age. I've had regard to your mental illness. I have taken it into account in deciding both whether I should fix a non-parole period and deciding what that non-parole period should be."
Justice Paul Coghlan concluded his remarks by stating that he had considered the full picture of Arthur, including his past, his prior behavior, the character references submitted on his behalf, and the support he continued to receive from his family. But he then emphasized what he saw as the most tragic aspect of this case, not only the act itself, but the way those around it had begun to blame themselves. The judge made it clear that they should not. This was not their fault. This was an act Arthur chose to commit, and it was Arthur who must bear responsibility for it.
They should not. You did what you did. You are responsible for it, and nobody else is.
And on April 11th, 2011, the trial came to a close with an irreversible verdict. Arthur Freeman was sentenced to life imprisonment, with a minimum of 32 years before he would be eligible to apply for parole.
You'll be sentenced to be in prison for life. I fix a period of 32 years before you will be eligible for parole. It means that the earliest date you will qualify to be released will be the 29th of January 2041, when you will be 67 years of age.
After the sentence was handed down, Arthur Freeman quickly filed an appeal in May 2011, but it was rejected shortly afterward. However, the story did not end there. Following the trial, an independent inquiry was launched, centered on a question that continued to trouble many. Could this tragedy have been prevented earlier? The focus of the investigation turned to the general practitioners whom Peta Barnes had consulted before the incident. In her testimony, Peta stated that she had repeatedly expressed concerns about Arthur and the safety of her children to 3 different doctors during 2007 and 2008, yet those warnings did not lead to any formal action from authorities. Peta stated plainly during the inquiry, "I told Dr. Tierman that I believed he would kill my children, and I believed he was cunning enough to do it to get back at me." A statement that forced anyone hearing it to pause. Under regulations in the state of Victoria, doctors are required to contact police if they have reasonable grounds to believe a child is at risk of serious harm. But in this case, the warning signs were never turned into action. However, when questioned during the inquiry, the general practitioners presented a completely different perspective. They stated that at the time, they did not believe the children were facing any immediate risk. The initial concerns had gradually been eased when they learned that Peter Barnes had previously contacted police regarding family disputes in 2007, and those incidents had been addressed. From their point of view, there were no clear signs that the situation was escalating beyond control. All three doctors confirmed that they had seen Arthur attend appointments with the children and had not observed any behavior they considered dangerous or harmful. One of them even stated during the inquiry that he did not recall having any specific concerns about the children's safety, nor had he witnessed anything unusual in Arthur's behavior. The other two doctors, who had monitored the family's health over a period of time, reached similar conclusions, that there were no clear indicators suggesting that Darcy or her siblings were in immediate danger. When the inquiry concluded, Coroner Ian Gray did not issue any adverse findings against any doctor or specialist, emphasizing that no one could have accurately predicted Arthur's actions. He stated, "The evidence before me leads me to conclude that Freeman's actions and Darcy's death could not have been predicted with any high degree of certainty." However, he also pointed to a critical issue. The system still needed improvement. He recommended that the Royal Australian College of General Practitioners strengthen mandatory training to help doctors better identify and respond to high-risk situations, as they are often the first line of defense in recognizing warning signs before it is too late. A few years later, in 2014, Peter Barnes reached a compensation settlement with Vic Roads, centered on the lack of safety barriers on the West Gate Bridge, where she believed that, had proper protective measures been in place, things might have been different. Following the tragedy, barriers were installed along the entire bridge. But despite those changes in infrastructure, what happened that day left a mark that could never be erased. The case continues to weigh heavily on many in Australia, especially the emergency responders who were present at the scene, those who did everything within their power to save Darcy Freeman, yet still carry the memory with them to this day. In the end, Peter expressed her gratitude to them, calling them people who went far beyond their duty. The case of Darcy Freeman is not just a family tragedy. It is a chilling warning of what can happen when emotions are pushed to the extreme, when anger and loss of control override reason. Sometimes the warning signs appear long before, but they are not clear enough for anyone to recognize the true level of danger. And the price paid is something that can never be undone. If there is one thing we can take away from this story, it is this: never underestimate psychological instability and family conflict, because sometimes a single decision made in a matter of seconds can change everything forever. Thank you for listening to today's story on this true crime documentary journey. If you would like to honor Darcy, please leave a comment below. Don't forget to share this video so more people can learn about this case. And hit like and subscribe so you won't miss the next true crime documentary. I'll see you again in the next story.